For decades, opening a fantasy novel meant making a familiar promise. A pure-hearted farm boy, usually clad in shining armor, receives a grand prophecy or a mystical call to adventure that tasks him with saving the entire universe. Joe Abercrombie opens The Blade itself by throwing a battered, bleeding man off a cliff into a freezing river. His second chapter introduces an inquisitor who is utterly paralyzed by a flight of stairs. His third introduces a wealthy nobleman cheating his closest friends at a casual game of cards. When a character's greatest challenge is a flight of stairs rather than a dark lord, the genre's focus moves from the destiny of the world to the durability of the human body. These specific, grounded failures prioritize the messiness of life over the tidiness of a quest. Joe Abercrombie built his reputation on this shift. He stripped away the concept of destiny entirely, focusing his narrative on dirt, blood, and deeply flawed humans simply trying to make it through the day. He even telegraphs this philosophy right on the title page, borrowing a quote from Homer. The blade itself incites to deeds of violence. In this world, a sword isn't a magical tool for justice. It is a corrupting force that brings ruin to everyone who touches it. By centering the narrative on these three broken perspectives, Abercrombie tethers the fate of his world to the intimate, physical pain of the people living in it. We meet Logan Ninefingers in a state of absolute terror. He isn't charging into a glorious battle. He is plunging barefoot through slush, fleeing a monstrous Shanka ambush, having just lost his entire crew. His introductory scene is defined entirely by exhaustion and grief. When Logan eventually sneaks back to the ruins of his camp, he doesn't retrieve a legendary weapon or a mystical artifact. He risks his life to dig through the mud and salvage his old, dented cooking pot. The narrative immediately establishes the rules of the world through strict physical necessity. You can't eat a prophecy. You need a pot. Later, Logan summons ancient forest spirits, a setup that usually leads to a mystical guide offering sage advice. Instead, the spirits are utterly mundane. They stare at him blankly, offer useless rumors, and admit they are dying out anyway. They are practically unhelpful, leaving Logan exactly where he started. This relentless focus on the bleak physical reality of survival is the defining characteristic of a specific subgenre of fantasy known as grimdark. Logan actually debates turning back to die in a blaze of vengeance against his enemies, a glorious death. But he looks down at his small knife and realizes no one is left to sing his song anyway. He chooses to head south and accept a bleak life as a wanderer. Logan's perspective builds a world defined by the brutal, lingering cost of every physical action. There is no triumph here. Survival is the only true victory. The narrative then shifts deep underground to the claustrophobic hallways of the Inquisition. Here we meet Inquisitor Glokta, a dark, twisted mirror to the classic clever rogue or wise mentor archetypes. He is a state-sanctioned torturer. Glokta's entire worldview is dictated by chronic physical agony. He survived 2 years in an enemy prison, and now his existence is reduced to a terrifyingly simple rhythm: click, tap, pain. His cane, his dragging foot, and the endless spasms in his spine. The true horror of Glokta's villainy is how thoroughly mundane it is. He isn't serving a dark god or plotting to conquer the realm. He spends his time framing a wealthy merchant named Salem Ruse for treason, purely to extort taxes for the crown. This flowchart illustrates the Inquisition's true function. We see gold coins funneling upwards from the merchant guilds, passing directly through the hands of the Inquisitors, and collecting at the top with Archlector Salt. The Inquisition is a political extortion machine, not a mystical threat. Glokta is terrifying to the men strapped to his chair, but his interactions with his superiors reveal him to be a trapped, disposable asset. He is squeezed from below by the angry guilds and threatened from above by an archlector who demands constant results. Glokta's lens reveals a society driven entirely by systemic cruelty, institutional greed, and the universal fear of pain. Pulling up to the sunlit surface of the capital city, the tone shifts abruptly to a beautiful spring day, complete with chirping birds and manicured lawns. This is the domain of Captain Jezel Dan Luthar. While Logan fights for his life and Glokta tortures for the state, Jezel's primary conflict is a casual game of cards. He sits under a cedar tree, actively trying to fleece his fellow officers so he can afford new uniforms and liquor. Jezel's internal monologue consists entirely of superficial judgments. He evaluates Caspa for his stupidity, mocks Jallenhorn's temper, and plots to drain young Brint of his monthly allowance. His comfortable arrogance and petty worries stand in glaring contrast to the agonizing, life-or-death realities we just experienced with Logan and Glokta. Jezel's perspective demonstrates how upper-class privilege creates an artificial bubble. The nobility are entirely blind to the foundation of blood and torture their society is built upon, insulated by their own wealth. Logan's survival, Glokta's suffering, and Jezel's superficiality don't just tell three separate stories, they act as the architectural pillars for the entire setting. There is a deliberate absence of traditional exposition in the text. You will not find massive lore dumps or objective history lessons breaking up the chapters. This diagram shows a concept we can call character-driven world-building. The universe's rules are strictly limited to what the characters directly suffer, administer, or exploit. The world only exists where these three perspectives overlap. Because the camera is locked behind the eyes of these deeply flawed narrators, the reader is forced to piece the larger political reality together themselves. It creates a highly immersive, puzzle-like reading experience. Abercrombie's world gains its weight from the honesty of the human mind. The most effective way to build a believable world is to focus on the specific, narrow lives of the people trapped inside it.